you've survived up until this point, I see. I think that you might be uncertain whether you've survived or not. I'm telling you you've survived, if you can hear me, so that's good. What I want to talk about now is using the practical use of neuroscience in everyday leadership and solving some of these big, grand challenges that we have. So for all of the talk about exponentiality and all these new things that are happening, it's kind of hard sometimes to take it from the esoteric and get down to the brass tacks of how you would actually make these things work. And tying into yesterday, one of the most important things, like I said, is developing these uncommon partnerships. And uncommon partnerships are primarily with people, but they're also with different technologies and capabilities. So you wouldn't expect some of these convergences to happen, but that's what makes it cool, and that's what makes it work. All right. So can I tell you a story? Can I tell you a story? All right, it worked. Okay. See you guys. No, I'm just... So the year is 1812. These are our friends. They might look like they're working on this piece of machinery, but they're actually destroying it. These are the famous Luddites. And this is in England. And what had happened was, because of the Napoleonic Wars, there was huge systemic changes in Europe. And then also, too, just changes in style had taken textile workers who were real, true craftsmen and experts that had been doing this for generations and creating hosiery and other things. They had completely been disintermediated from their business as a result of this newfangled fabrication, where people were able to make things that were low-skilled workers 100 times faster than they were. And these workers were not anti-technology. Actually, all of these workers, by and large, were the leaders in technology in their field. What had happened was, this is the first time this had really ever happened, they were disintermediated from that technology. And so they were cut out from the entire system. So their only real way to get back in was to revolt. And so we know what happened with the Luddites. They broke stuff. They burned things down. And they got this name from this fictitious person, General Ludd, that they were supposedly getting all of their orders from. He's like a Robin Hood figure. And the reason why I bring this up is we are going through a very similar thing today. Not in the sense where people are breaking things down, but people are being disintermediated from the work that they had done forever and ever and ever. And we're not just talking about low-skilled labor. We're talking about higher-skilled labor. We're talking about people that had invested years and years and years in educating themselves. These were not lazy people. They were educating themselves in their craft that was supposed to sustain them and their families. We are seeing that exact same thing today with both lower-skilled workers and higher-skilled workers. The proportion of people in the United States alone that have crushing amounts of education debt is staggering, and they're not able to move forward with their lives. They're not able to get married. They're not able to buy houses. They're not able to move forward at all because they have invested so much into a system that isn't perpetually or isn't paying for them. If you go, this is a time over time from the 1850 to 2015. It just illustrates the proportion of work that was done amongst people. And this is in the United States. So basically what you see here is you see that agriculture clearly used to be a much bigger proportion of the population, and then slowly over time became very, very narrow. What took its place by and large was retail. Retail. And we see that today. We see that across the globe. Retail is really the thing. And what I mean by retail is you mean people selling stuff and people being in that chain of selling things in a shop. Now, what happens when you don't need those shops anymore? Where are these people going to go? What are they going to do? Having a bunch of people that used to work that no longer work, and then you have an entire group that is really taking advantage of this exponential world, this have and have-nots, is not a good recipe for social order or for happiness, period. Now, if you go and you learn from history and you look at the Luddites, what we saw is that there was a big societal and systemic and economic change that were inextricably linked. But what hadn't happened was there was no real thought to how we could smooth out this transition. And we are in a similar situation where we are seeing the beginnings of artificial intelligence. We're just at the beginning. We're seeing the beginnings of artificial intelligence, some of these other things, but we have the opportunity, you have the opportunity to really focus on how do we smooth this transition for people. Because it can be a bumpy one or it can be a smooth one. So, a good example of this is globally, there are jobs that only require a high school diploma or high school certificate and that pay $75,000 to $125,000 a year. What's missing there in those jobs, like this electrical lineman job, is a very short 6-month training program. Now, the number of jobs that are available versus the number of people that can go inside of these training programs is completely out of whack. So there's about 7 jobs for every 1 place inside of a training program because the system is not set up for it. It never was designed to be able to have this much throughput. And it's not just electrical lineman jobs, it's all of these new things like wind turbine, installation and repair, solar panel, same thing, over and over and over again. These are highly skilled, but low traditional education required jobs that pay very, very well. And these are the jobs that are least robotable in the near future. These are the jobs we should be trying to fix, but the traditional education systems just do not work for it. If you go to a technical training program, you can be in there for a year or more and still not even have the certificate that you need to be able to get into these jobs. So how do we fix these problems? How do we fix these systemic problems so you can get people out of this structural unemployment that's happening because of automation and other things and move them far forward into this economy together? It's beneficial for us as in an economic standpoint, but it's also just the right thing to do. All right. Well, the solution is, one of the many solutions is this thing we developed, and this is the first time I've ever talked about this publicly, so I guess this is sort of an announcement. It's this thing we call uncommon learning. What it is I talked about this briefly yesterday, you wear an EEG headset, and you have a virtual reality goggles, and while the reason for doing that is this EEG headset is collecting what's going on in your head, and then it's immediately transferring that into the experience, so it makes it the most optimally difficult experience that you could, so you can learn the most you can in the shortest amount of time possible. And then instead of it being book learning, where you're learning how to do something physical by writing down in a pen and paper, you are learning really while you're doing it in the most in the most intuitive way possible by actually moving and doing these things. So this is one example. This is for a pizza chain. And it's teaching a new employee actually how to do all of these various types of pizza. And you would not, anybody worked in a restaurant before? You know, when I worked in a restaurant the first time, they taught me all of the different things that I had to build and how to like make it all happen. And it all seemed very intellectually obvious, like you do this and do that. But then all of a sudden, when you actually had to do it, like I completely forgot everything. I don't know if you had that experience. And that's the exact same way here. So instead of sitting down and learning how to do it, in these chains, pizza chains in the United States, they actually just put on the VR headset and EEG headset, and then you see how they actually get to experience it. And it's about 8 to 10 times more efficient than the traditional way of teaching these folks. Now think about the monetary value of that. So instead of those folks just sitting around learning, making a bunch of mistakes, they're ready to just jump in. And this is just making pizzas. So what you see here on this side here, she is wearing the headset and the eye tracking, the VR headset, and then you're seeing what she would see. And then on the bottom here, you're seeing a dashboard of all of the, not all, but many of the metrics that we're collecting. So then what you can do is after the fact, you can model employees that were doing really well and have done well over time, and then you can start to understand the kind of employees that you want to continue to have, and you can track them based on how they're performing in their training. We've been tracking training for employees forever, but now we can finally have a more quantitative measure of what's working and not working. Because these are the things we're collecting. We're collecting cognitive load, so when we think about thinking, yesterday I talked about being overwhelmed and underwhelmed and then whelmed, right? That's where you want to be. You want to be in that sweet spot. Emotional engagement, or am I emotionally engaged? It's a difficult thing to do. Am I motivated? Am I actually feeling it? Am I doing it? And then am I actually looking and paying attention? Because we all have that experience where we are looking but not really seeing. Yes. So anyway, for us it was all about understanding how do we quantify things that feel very unquantifiable, and then being able to scale those things so that we can help to kind of break the logjam on this structural unemployment. And the first thing, like I talked about yesterday, is applying this experimental design. This is basically the scientific method. What is your hypothesis? How do we test it? What are the measures of success? And then how do we track that over time? And remember, as I talked about yesterday, we're able to use this to be able to figure out that phone-based augmented reality would be the thing that would get us to where we wanted to go, which was to get people more engaged in home improvement and make it easier for them, and even though that was counter to what the industry was saying. So having new measures of success like neuroscience is critically important to be able to solve these other problems. By no means am I saying that augmented reality, virtual reality, and neuroscience are the only ways to solve these problems. What I'm saying is what we have today is insufficient for the future, even in the short term. So we have to keep experimenting with these things. Adam, can I bring you on stage here? We would love to show you how this works out and plays out in real time. So come on out. Dimitri, can you come out too? So this is what happens at a Singularity event. You might just all of a sudden have an EEG headset placed upon your head, huh? Yeah. How do you feel? Good. Feel awesome? Yeah. Good. No, you're not on the mic, so I can tell you that he feels amazing right now. And can we switch over to the live feed? Great. So what we have here, so we've got this EEG headset. Now, the ones that we use for the real studies are being deployed right now. So this one's a little more old school. But what it's doing is it's in real time tracking what's going on inside of his head. So let me just kind of give an overview real quick. So what we have here is a rough dashboard that's giving the real-time feedback. So don't worry about the heart rate stuff, it's not as important, but the workload is the cognitive workload. So this is overwhelmed, underwhelmed. So the yellow line, you don't want it to be too high, too long, and you don't want it to be too low, too long. You want it to be in the middle, right? With the green, with the engagement, that's an emotional valence. So what you really want there is you want, generally, not always, but you want some sort of engagement. And then the blue is an aggregate measure that describes distraction. And could we say that you generally want distraction to be high or low? People seem unsure. Low is the answer. So all across the board, you can see moment by moment, second by second, how things are working. And then what we can do is we can go back and we can diagnostically try to break down the experience of why this is working or why this is not working. And then it becomes a metal detector of where to dig, what to dig up and what to do. So Dimitri, can you tell us about the last movie that you saw?
The last movie is obviously Avengers.
Ooh. Did you like the Avengers? I can tell that you did.
Of course.
All right. It's Marvel. It's Marvel. So would you say you're more of a Marvel fan or a DC fan?
Definitely more Marvel.
Definitely more of a Marvel fan. Who's your favorite character? What's your favorite franchise? The Hulk. Why do you like the Hulk so much?
He's like me.
He's like you. Well, that makes perfect sense. I love it so much. Okay, great. Well, can you tell me about your family?
So I'm married. I've got my son, a stepson, a foster child, and then very much an extended family with the foster child's grandparents, and it's just big.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
4 dogs, lots of fish, lots of birds.
Woo! That's a lot, clearly. The distraction level went way up as you were thinking about the animals and the birds and the foster children. Can you do something else for me? Can you start from the number 300? And then in your head, don't have to repeat it out loud, take 7 away. So 293, and just kind of keep going and kind of keep that going in your head while I keep talking, if that's okay. So the benefit of this, and I could take my phone out and have them play a game while I'm doing this, what you can see is second by second what's going on, and then you can, like I said, go back and diagnostically try to understand what's happening. What this does from an actual company standpoint is instead of me being a really good arguer or being in a higher level position that I can argue my way into my way of what I think is the right thing, this provides a level of quantitative understanding that you just wouldn't have in another way that's just much, much faster and far, far cheaper. Still going? Wow, that's amazing. I usually stop after the second one. Fantastic. And then the other thing too is that you can test all kinds of different experiences. So you can test, which I'll talk about later, in-store and different things. And it gets beyond just asking people what they think. If you ask people what they think, that's really, really great, but it's all going through this processing unit called your rational brain. Who here has told themselves that they're going to work out more this year? Who here has actually worked out more this year? Oh, really? Well, that's pretty impressive. I told myself I was going to work out more this year. I have not. So my belief about myself and what I say and what I do aren't always tied together. The cool thing about this is I get behind the curtain again, and you can kind of see what's going. So you can imagine if we can extract that in real-time data, and then you process it through some sort of virtual reality headset or other experiences, that you can do more of this dynamic, more bespoke training and learning at scale, which is really the goal. Cool? Awesome. Thank you so much. And this is Adam, by the way, so you can come talk to Adam in the breaks, and you can try it out and experience some of the cool stuff there. Thank you so much. Thanks, Dimitri. So, if we go back to the screen here, perfect. So we use this when I was at Lowe's and other companies to fix shelf sets too. So it doesn't have to just be for training. Training is a critically important thing, but it's also about how to break down and how to fix some of these intractable problems. Has anyone bought a light bulb lately? No one? No one bought a light bulb lately? It's really hard now. You know, when I was a kid, a light bulb was there were 4 choices, and they were all pretty cheap. Now you can buy a $300 light bulb. And so what we were seeing at Lowe's was that category, which was very, very stable, as the category got more complex, the sales went down. So you could literally watch and go to the store and see people just stand in front of the aisle and go I'll just live in the dark? I don't know what to do. And so that's really worrying, right? Because you're adding more choice thinking that it's going to provide more choice, which would drive more sales. But it actually did the opposite. It's this academic principle called the paradox of choice, which you may have heard of. And so we are just filled with choice. We've had more choice than we've ever had in our entire existence as humans, and it's only going to get worse or better depending on how you look at it. So then how do we make these experiences more intuitive? You can't just ask a customer well, what do you think? What would be easier for you? They'll come up with some sort of rational idea, but it may not be the most intuitive way. So what we would do is we put these EEG headsets and eye tracking goggles on people and send them in front of different versions of that shelf space, and then we could see how they were shopping it. And then we could even predict what they were going to buy before they bought it. Way before. And then we could take all of that understanding and then create a more optimal shelf set. And then we were able to create that intuitive shelf set. And then guess what? When we implemented that, sales not only went back to where they were, but they went up. And not because we're tricking people, we're just making it easier to shop the category, which is what we all want, right? And it goes back to the movie thing. Well, what did you like about the movie? It's just great. You're not going, in a minute 3, the character entered the stage, and I really liked the shade of green that the character was. And, people just we don't experience things that way. We experience things holistically, right? We would go insane if we had to do it that way. So this, once again, provides a level of detail that we weren't able to do before, and it's being used very practically. Another way that we use it is in the boardroom. Who here is in a management team? I'm sorry. This is the most passive-aggressive organization on the planet, is being on a management team of a large company. It's a bunch of people pretending to be friends that actually hate each other. Okay? It's like Mean Girls times 1,000. Okay. So, behavioral scientist, the first time I was really in a management team meeting, I had kind of climbed the ladder enough, and I was like, this is really dysfunctional. Because we would have these meetings, and they weren't really any meetings. It was like this show, and the decisions were made in the hallway before or after. And the things that were discussed in the meeting were very rarely tied towards any action. Once again, this goes back to the presentation problem. There's something wrong here. The whole point of getting together as a management team is we're supposed to talk openly and solve hard problems. Fair to say? That's the idea. But very rarely did it happen. So I had this big idea, which was, why don't I put EEG headsets on all of the management team, and I'll sit in the back. And then, while they're discussing whatever they're discussing, I will say, this thing that's being talked about, there are a bunch of people in the room, I don't know who you are actually because it's anonymized, but there are a bunch of people in the room that are actually really uncomfortable with what's being discussed, but no one's said a thing. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to sit here until someone talks about why they're annoyed or upset. Because what we're not going to do is we're going to go back into the hallway and talk crap about it after the fact. Because that's really passive-aggressive, unproductive behavior. And so, as you can imagine, they hated it the first time. Hated it. But then, as we kind of went through that and no one was being penalized, actually the meetings got much, much faster. To the point where we didn't even have to use the headsets anymore. Because people then just started, I don't know, using the management team meetings to have management team meetings. So we've been doing that over and over again, and I've done this in a lot of large boards and small boards across the world, and it works very, very well. Once again, you take a problem that feels intractable, the human stuff, and you apply a little bit of exponential technology, and you can do some pretty cool things that streamline the process and make things better. So I'm not saying you buy a bunch of EEG headsets. What I am saying is try to find whatever's broken and find new ways of using exponential tech to be able to make it work. So this uncommon learning, back to the learning issue. Learning is, I think, one of the biggest challenges of our time. So for all of the big intractable problems, energy, poverty, all of these things, so many of these issues are inextricably tied towards learning and unlearning and relearning. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to really take advantage of these new technologies and apply them to learning? So all of this stuff is at its very infancy, but even at its infancy, it's 8 to 10 times more efficient than the best traditional learning right now. That's a pretty good return. So all of these things are being used right now. You can use them too. My plea is to find ways to bring all these exponential technologies into your workplace. Literally force it. Put it on the agenda. When you have meetings, try to find a way, both at the top, what is our narrative? Back to what I was talking about before. What is our narrative? And at the very end, which exponential technologies will we try to bring in and experiment and bring in today in order to try to make these things better? Because it's never going to get super easy to do. It's only going to get harder and more complicated. Now is going to be the easiest time to do it. And then lastly, again, I guess I went through the slides a little too fast yesterday. This is that course that I talked about yesterday that gets more into the details of a lot of these things. And of course, there's a discount for all of you fine folks that attended here. And we'll be outside as well at the lab booth. So you can try some of these newer things, 3D printing, a bunch of other things, and ask any questions that you might have. Thank you so much. What you're doing here, I just want to say here, before I leave, this is a privilege. This is a privileged thing that we have the time and the resources and the ability to be able to sit here and think about how to solve these problems. So do not take that lightly. Joseph Campbell, who's one of my heroes, he really popularized this idea of the hero's journey. And in that hero's journey, there are 3 component pieces. There are many different ways to break it out. But the first is the call to action. If you think about Luke Skywalker, he showed up. He's just this workaday farmer on Tatooine, right? A moisture farmer. And then he has this magical thing happen to him. And he could have chosen to do it or not do it. That is where you are right now. You have the opportunity, I'm telling you, this is your call to adventure. This is your initiation to be able to take these things and go with it. Some of you will, but I'm hoping that most of you will. Because this is really the time to make all this stuff happen. Thanks.